All right, everybody, welcome to the show. A lot of stuff going on. Let's see if we can get a little insight into this stuff. First, the news. It looks like Motaba Khomeini, I hope I'm saying that right. I think it's Khomeini. The third supreme leader is in a coma, might be missing a limb, and they're not sure if he's dead. So maybe by the time this airs, something will come out. But they should meet at a McDonald's, other than their usual known bunkers. No one is raising their hand right now saying, pick me, to be the next supreme leader. I wonder why. But there's some more weirdness going on, with Epstein. Allegedly, one of the guards miscounted the people on her block. That sounds interesting. Inmates overheard the guards saying, you killed him. We need to cover it up. Large sums of money were being deposited in a guard's account, and she was driving a brand new Range Rover. That's a little interesting. Allegedly. Again, this is all allegedly, so, and wait, it even gets weirder. So Epstein had his prostate removed earlier, and the autopsy said his prostate was normal, fully intact. So whoever they autopsied, was probably not Epstein. There's also allegedly a van transporting an inmate during the same time. So, the big questions are, did he commit suicide? Was he murdered? Is he still alive? I wonder if his twin brother's still around, just asking for a friend. But maybe the FBI can clarify this, so basically, so is he still alive? Obviously he didn't hang himself and he wasn't murdered. And so whose body was that and where is he now? Talk about crazy makers. I wonder if Bill and Hillary know. Who's going to ask them and why bother? Are they even capable of ever telling the truth? All right, it looks like Teflon Trump has avoided the Democrats' onslaught of Epstein allegations. Files are still being released. Personally, I think he was a billionaire partier in his early years, then settled down to save America and take out the deep state. I think he saw how messed up they were. An assassination attempt can be a real come to Jesus moment. Despite all the accusations, he has fulfilled most of his promises, the platform he ran on, other than no new wars. So actually, that was Bibi's war. They pretty much control everything. It's political and financial suicide to go against them. I'm a little choked up right now because Pele is just screaming right now. Kilauea is going off big time. A little fog in the air. Luckily, we have some rain. We have a big storm coming through. So if I disappear off the air, it's because of that storm. Anyway, the temptations that come with fame and fortune aren't easy to resist. So many people with agendas, and when those agendas are not fulfilled, they become victims and some resort to blackmail. I've seen it myself. It's crazy. Um, Navigating the rich and famous world is a true test of character. Only a handful of actors have made it through. Politics, Hollywood, the music industry, all of it. If you've gone through it unbroken, that's quite a testimony as to your character. I was told in politics, Hollywood, and the music industry, when trying to find someone with moral integrity, it's like searching for a baby Ruth, a chocolate bar in a septic tank, and that's really being revealed right now. I'm sure if there was abuse, it'll come to light as everything else is being revealed in the days to come. His closeness to Netanyahu tosses a major red flag, could be a variety of reasons. Keep your friends close, your enemies closer. There might be a bigger picture unfolding according to Q and the Anons, Israel, or I should say Anons. I don't want to sound off on that. It will be last. So anyway, they're saying that Israel is going to take a fall. The latest news that's uncensored is showing Israel being slammed by ICBMs, multiple warhead bunker busters, everything. Bibi's bunker and office was destroyed, and people are asking, where's Bibi? Quite a few countries will not allow him access to their airspace. Maybe he's just flying around in circles while those people are, taking a pounding, being blown to bits. According to polls, 82% of the Israelis were fine with the genocide in Gaza. I think Charlie Kirk said that. He said they're all IDF, so, there just might be a reality check, a karmic lesson there. Before my observations throw some people into a panic, I have several questions. We know there are doubles, masks, actors, even clones. When we get emotionally caught up in all the drama, thinking we have all the answers, maybe it's time to take a deep breath, become centered and ask the question, is any of this real? Let's play that video.
Whoa, what the? Oh my God! Holy.
Which Trump am I condemning? Getting worked up into a tizzy over, are the other political leaders, actors, key deep, state players still alive? Which one am I angry with? Yeah, there might be three or four of them, am I accusing one for something a clone or a masked actor might have done? How do you know anymore? How effective is attacking and arguing with a cardboard cutout? How much in the news is social engineering to keep people divided? Who are the directors of this play? What are their agendas? Is there a war between white hats, honorable generals, and leaders against the global elite with their insatiable lust for power and wealth? Billionaire eugenicists that want to reduce 90% of the Earth's population? Those keeping the people divided in endless wars, poisoning your air, water, food, even your medicine, all the time being distracted by the corporate lamestream media they own, You can tell who is who by what they do, not by what they say, which is a big one right now. We're going to have to start using that as discernment. Who's empowering the individual, protecting your freedom, stopping the genocide, cleaning up the environment, your air, water, and food? Are you getting behind them? A classic example is while everyone is focused on the Middle East, your skies are being poisoned with chemtrails, a toxic dump with heavy metals, chemicals, nanobots, biologicals, microplastics, all activated by 5 and 6G. So maybe we should be knocking these tankers out of the sky over America first, How that's a good America First program. Let's clean up the attacks on the American people over our skies before we go jumping into others. So anyway, we have to ask the question, who's poisoning our farmland, our air, our water, our land, creating bioweapons, plagues, releasing them, followed by a vaccine more deadly than the virus, It's time to get our priorities in order, recognize who the real enemy is. Do you think all those headaches, sinus, lung, gastrointestinal infections, muscle and joint pain are normal? The blood clots, heart attacks? Why are parents burying their children? There is a hidden war in which most are totally oblivious. So it's time to think and research outside the box, educate yourself, develop your own your own inner sensitivity, and those wild conspiracy theories over time have proven to be factual. Someone should list them all in a book with a checkbox for the ones proven to be true. It'd be a very long book, basically. Okay, the next subject is several life lessons I've learned. So anyway, always remain the observer. Don't take sides. Nothing is as it seems. Arguing with friends and relatives attached to the outcome will leave you sad. It also create divisions in your family. So why not just say, there's so many opinions on that. I guess we will see. Don't be attached to their acceptance and approval. Let them figure it out themselves. It creates a lot of inner peace when you take that stance. When you delve deep, into any divisionary movement, one often finds there's a hidden agenda dressed up as noble virtue, often perpetuating victim patterns, usually at the victim's expense. There's no personal responsibility or healing, just perpetuation and division, basically. And so, they don't offer solutions. They just perpetuate the division. Anyway, the right wing and the left wing are the same birds. Those in arrogance that believe they are the chosen ones at the expense of all others with a sense of entitlement now control the bird. That bird is in free fall. Only an awakening of the masses into unity consciousness will save the bird. Without that, it only flies in erratic circles by design until it crashes. So a great master once said, always remember three things, always rise, and they're the sun, the moon, and the truth. So wait for it. Don't be quick to form an opinion. Over time, you're going to find out your reference points have all changed. Here's another one, big one for me. Don't assume people have the same beliefs, values, morality, or integrity as you. Projecting your nature on others will only lead in disappointment. It took me several hard lessons to learn that one. The biggest one is trust is earned. And, people will say one thing, think something else, and do another. I learned that after my near-death experience. When I came back, I could hear what people thought, I could feel what they felt, and then I'd hear what they say. And they were never congruent. They always had hidden agendas. And so it took me a long time to figure that one out. And I still get caught because you want to believe people and you want to see the best in people, but they just may not have it in them. I sure learned here in Hawaii, that's another big lesson in Hawaii, but people just don't have the same integrity levels that we'd like them to have. Anyway, another one is praise God, tie your camel, and love yourself enough to set boundaries when necessary, and do all you can to become sovereign, balanced body, mind, and spirit. Natural, organic, unprocessed food should be your medicine. Know the purity of your water, where it comes from. Plant your fruit trees first because trees take a long time, and tend your gardens and grow enough for others. Always grow abundance. You can always share it or can it or preserve it, basically. Nature, this is how abundant nature is. If you take one kernel of corn, put it in the ground, you're going to get a stalk. Most times those stalks have 2 ears on them. Each ear has 500 kernels, basically. I counted them actually. So you've got about at least 500 to 1, if not 1,000 to 1. And that's the abundance of nature. And so all this lack we're experiencing is manufactured. And so the closer you get to nature, the more abundant you become. The further away you get from nature, the more, this manufactured lack and all this other, they keep them sick, poor, and stupid program comes into play. The most recent thing I've learned is there's no room for the authentic, those with, pure motive that walk in integrity, especially in the religious, spiritual, and UFO, UAP communities, the door is open wide for the posers, the shills, the moral and integrity challenged, those with runaway imaginations. They all rise to the top. And it's no different than most major institutions, unfortunately. Here in Hawaii, I've noticed, there are like tribes or cliques, they're not based on universal law. Their power is based on who has the biggest network, the biggest draw to capitalize upon. Many turn a blind eye to the actions of some of their leaders, especially their key members. And few have done, a deep dive into the character, you know, into their character, their life off the stage, blinded to actions totally outside of universal law. They just want to belong, and are afraid of challenging their leaders or speaking up. So God forbid you challenge the herd or the leadership. Some just want to have someone else tell them, what's going on rather than doing their own research. Others are just lazy concerning taking personal responsibility for establishing their own inner guidance. They are sheep, basically, And, this creates an ego-driven containment, a box limiting the expansion into higher consciousness and energy. And mostly it's because of fear of losing control of the group, which finances the operation. There are also three types of people that fall victim to flattery, men, women, and children. When, when told or believed they are special, it actually creates a division. What if everyone was special? Then there would be no division. And what if everybody was not special? Same thing. So anyway, all the images of God and self would come together. They would merge. You know, there's only expressed and hidden potential, much of which is diverse. So it all boils down to acting within universal law and outside of it. When someone comes along that has a high resonance, a clear connection or understanding of the multiverse, they are a threat to the leaders of the herd, especially if they're aware of their actions outside of universal law. The absence of moral integrity by the leaders or keep people in the box. They are the most threatened. Empowering the individual as motivation versus creating a dependency. It's a big difference. So, as I said before, these containment, creates a containment, and it should be an empowerment to free everybody, not be contained to one person's beliefs or patterns. So I'm just making an observation that was pointed out to me by the Palladians. It's an age-old problem due to many lacking discernment and a strong spiritual foundation. It takes courage to question without fear of retribution or isolation from those protecting the herd. It's something to ponder, wisdom from an advanced civilization that's transcended the division programs, fully understanding the nature of omnipresence. Anyway, I'm so thankful for these higher beings, being able to have conversations with them, because I'm going around in circles trying to figure this stuff out, and they come in one sentence and say this is what's going on. And it's usually like a bomb. It's boom, nails it. All right, this next message comes after recent appearances of Yeshua ben Joseph, most know as Jesus. We're going to go a little biblical here. We're going to go outside the Bible, actually. He was very excited about his true teachings finally getting out. I mean, when I connected with him, I looked up, I could see his face and everything. I go, "Is this who I think it is?" And he just smiled at me, and he was so excited. He was exuberant, about finally, the uncensored teachings of Jesus were getting out. And it's something we've been teaching at ECETI for over 40 years, once considered blasphemy and now verified by the Ethiopian Bible. This was followed by Uriel, the archangel, which intervened during an attack, by the archons, a group in direct opposition to Christ consciousness. So there's always an opposing factor, and the closer you get to nirvana, the more the demons rear their ugly heads. And so we really need to learn how to heal unseen, negative influences, use discernment, not get trapped in these containment boxes that are going on. And this isn't from a book or secondhand information, it's from firsthand experience. But anyway, they asked me to clarify a few things concerning the return of Jesus and what is unfolding in the Middle East. So this is going to be a real rabbit hole to go down. To understand what is unfolding in the Middle East and around the world, you need to drop into the heart divine knowingness with an understanding of who is behind the masks and the curtain. Feel if this message resonates for you personally. I have no attachment. If it doesn't make sense to you, toss it out. Truth always doesn't need defending. It'll come forward. So let's start at the beginning. Israel was created by the Rothschilds, known as the Shield of Edom. And you can do some research on that. It explains everything. The majority of Israel, especially the current government, are European. That's why they will not allow any DNA tests to go on there. Many Ashkenazi Jews came from Khazaria, now known as Ukraine. So look up their history. They're an ungodly group now as before. The last part of the name might tell you something. But anyway, the Ukraine has a long history of deception and decadence. Netanyahu is of Polish descent. Most previous Israeli leaders were of European descent. Palestinians have more Jewish DNA than the majority of Israelis. They're the true Semites, which explains the motive behind the genocide, which is not a holy war as the imposters would like you to believe. It's the expansionism of Israel, the greater Israel, the Zionist agenda, which includes dominion over most of the Middle East. And we've been their brute squad, basically. We've been misled. So you cannot criticize the genocide in Palestine by Israel and be anti-Semitic. It would be pro-Semitic, pro-Christian and pro-truth to speak out against the genocide, as the majority of the world now realizes. The majority of Americans too, as well. So Epstein, a main character with this group, represented the Rothschilds, the Edomites who created Israel. They have a long reach into world governments, political leaders, and agencies. The Edomites, the Canaanites, the descendants of Cain, and the Ashkenazi, as a collective, are known as the Cabal. There's a few other groups in there as well. They run the Bilderberger Group, the Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations, EU, United Nations, NATO, and the Deep State. Um, there are a few in there that are trying to do right, far and few between, but they still have some degree of integrity. At the top are the globalists, the billion trillionaire eugenicists, the war and disease profiteers, and they're behind the population reduction programs, the wars and pandemics, the toxic dumps called chemtrails, the poisoning of the air, water, and land, basically our entire food supply. They want to really shorten our lifespan and remove 90% of us. The Antichrist, along with the Edomites and the Canaanites, now occupy and control Israel as prophesied in the New Testament. Jesus referred to them as the synagogue of Satan. Jesus said, "If God were your father, you would love me. If you do not recognize me, you do not recognize the Father." I can go further into that. Basically, the path to enlightenment is when you become one with the one consciousness that encompasses all consciousness on all planes and dimensions throughout the multiverse. So you become one, the Father, and you become one. It's actually more like it's like the cosmic birth or Father, Mother, God principle to be all inclusive. And so he became one with God, as other masters have also, made that connection. But he was the example. He was the exemplar Christ, basically. So he also said, "You are of your father, the devil, the synagogue of Satan." Now, according to the New Testament, Israel is already occupied by the Antichrist, the Edomites, and the Canaanites, often referred to as Zionists. Upon the return of Jesus, they will be cast out. And that's according to the New Testament. So many secular Jews, those who follow the Talmud or do not recognize Jesus as the Messiah. In fact, they say he's a false prophet, condemned to hell, boiling in his own excrement, put to death by the Pharisees as he should have been. I mean, that's their belief, So this explains the harsh treatment of the Christians by Israel and the destruction of their churches. This is all part of the greater Israel expansionism program. So anyway, you cannot be a Christian and a Zionist. They're two opposites, basically. It's an oxymoron. They're sacrificing animals, a banned tradition according to the New Testament. They believe their Messiah will return, destroy all their enemies upon sacrificing the red heifers and building the new temple. The false Messiah or Antichrist will establish them as the chosen ones to rule at the expense of all others. This hubris, arrogance of being the chosen ones, and has nothing to do with enlightenment or omnipresence or God. It has everything to do with the old sacrificial gods of the past, which have pretty much been taken out. So they also say they're going to have dominion over, all those other children of God. They're referred to as goyim, non-believers, soulless, lower than animals, of which they can do anything, they desire. This has been exemplified and acknowledged in the Epstein files, along with the fact that Epstein was an agent of the Mossad, assisting in infiltration of governments and agencies globally, setting up, and blackmailing politicians and billionaires. So the things that were done to children and minors on the Epstein Island, Zorro Ranch and other facilities was horrific. I mean, it's about as ungodly as you can get. So anyway, so when you add the genocide in Gaza, this clearly establishes their arrogant and ungodly character. So many of their beliefs come from the Old Testament, based on the image of a jealous, wrathful, genocidal God, a sacrificial God of exclusion and division. Now, this is not all the Jews. There's some that accept Jesus as Messiah. Some just want to live a peaceful life, and make their own personal God connection. And many are peaceful and have total disdain over what happened in Gaza and the Zionists. So, just as most religions, including the Muslim tradition, they're all fractured. Many of the traditions and beliefs were dispelled in the New Testament, the new covenant Jesus proclaimed, where everyone is included. There is no blood right or blood guilt, along with the new image of God as all loving and all forgiving, an omnipresent, all inclusive God that favors character, not genetics. He replaced the jealous, wrathful, genocidal, sacrificial God of the Old Testament. The chosen ones are those who choose to accept Jesus and God into their hearts and live according to universal law. And this would also include other cultures living according to universal law, practicing service to others, love, and kindness. Many messengers were sent to many cultures. The preserved Ethiopian Bible with over 80 books versus the standard Bible with 60 covers all of this. His travels to Tibet and India, along with teachings of the divine feminine, are all coming out now, once censored and suppressed. And so we need to kind of update, Christians need to update their concept of Christianity and realize the foundation of Christianity is found throughout the world in many cultures. We're at a crossroads now where we're going to have to choose to be ruled by the arrogance and division of tyranny or universal law, brother, sisterly love, individual freedom, and prosperity for all. Are we going to choose self-service, personal gain at the expense of humanity and nature? You know, give up our God-given freedoms, take the downward spiral into social, economic, and environmental collapse? Are we going to take the upward spiral, living a spiritual life in service to others in harmony with each other and nature? One path or timeline comes to an end. The other ascends, ending, war, disease, and poverty, followed by 1,000 years of peace. In the Native American tradition, the two paths are spelled out on the Hopi prophecy stone, along with other nations' prophecies. They also speak of the fall of the beast, after which we reunite with the greater family of man, the star nations, and take a quantum leap in evolution. Again, we're all given the opportunity to choose our path. Choose your path wisely because it will determine your future in the days to come. It's all going to choose your future in the hereafter as well. So we are in the midst of a great reveal. The masks and curtains are all coming down. Nothing will remain hidden, and karma will be amplified and accelerated. This explains the chaos the world is now experiencing. Nations, cities, towns, all have a collective karma. Many cities will succumb to natural disasters and be no more. Nature is slow to act, but thorough. Those cities that are in social, economic, and environmental collapse will call in the earth changes. It's all connected. They're finding that in these big cities that are collapsing, socially collapsing, they can actually measure the energy fields, and they're like at all-time low. Some are even negative. And that actually harms the earth, and the earth feels that and says, okay, I got to do something about this. I got to bring in a huge earthquake and bring in a massive storm or a tidal wave or something to clean this mess up. And it's really funny. There's an old saying, there are no atheists in the foxhole. And when you're in the midst of a great flood or a hurricane or a massive storm or earthquake, we all we all start praying. It's natural. It's kind of weird. We all start apologizing. Oh, sorry, God, I probably could have done things better, you know, and that's just the way it is. And this also includes the wayward religions, the spiritual and scientific and UFO, UAP community. So now you know why he said he's the most censored, in some cases, falsely slandered organization on the planet. You mirror and amplify people's wounds, traumas, wrong conclusions, past experiences, victim patterns. You reveal the hidden agendas and actions outside of universal law. It's called the wake of a yogi. People either love or hate you, depending on their past and whether they love or hate themselves, projected into the mirror. Their love for you is directly related to how much they've done their inner work, basically. That's why we made the t-shirt. I'm not your father, your mother, or your ex-lover. I'm just sitting here. It's well documented, the ascended masters, saints, and sages, the benevolent, spiritually, and technologically advanced, off-worlders, the UFO, UAPs are appearing at, ECETI Ranch, Washington, and Hawaii, you know, and often they're not appearing at these divisionary religions, the spiritual UFO, UAP conferences. Why? You know, they in most cases have not risen to the occasion, are embroiled in social consciousness, competition, have not mastered divisionary and controlling tactics, or have hidden agendas, all known by the spiritually advanced off-world entities and the ascended masters. And if you're aligned with them, you're a threat, basically. So many are working with another group, as we have said before. Just because you're dead does not mean you're enlightened, and just because you are an ET does not mean you're benevolent. The mind in which you seek is the mind in which you connect. Basically, we are either in self-service, motivated by fame, power, and profit, or in service to others, empowering the individual. Operating from universal law, brother, sister love, individual freedom, and prosperity for all, or not. It's really that simple. You break things down to their basics, and you can see what's going on, getting back down to the basics. So hopefully this will bring clarity and direction for those who want to continue to express on an ever-ascending planet and live within universal law. I hope this is clearing up the thing, because I'm seeing just crazy making stuff and all this crazy confusion. And if you're not doing your spirit time, your downtime, this is going to make you crazy, basically. So the thing I can suggest most of all right now is, use discernment, use universal law to discern from, focus on love and joy and bliss, and, putting into the madness within ourselves, and then the madness outside takes care of itself, because mainly you just don't participate in it. And, we need to take our shoes off, get grounded, walk on the land. As I said before, eat as close to the land as possible, and find some pure water and do your meditation time, and that'll get us through. So anyway, on that note, I just wanted to clear some things up. There is some really crazy stuff going on out there, and I'm choosing not to participate in it, but it keeps trying to pull me into it. So every time I go out and try to work with other people or groups, all this stuff rears its ugly head, and it's just getting old. So what's that song? It's the end of the world and we know it. Maybe we should play that one. But I feel fine. It's like, if we do our work, our inner work, we'll all be fine. So on that note, I'm signing off. Have a great evening, and we'll see you next Saturday.
They want you to believe the wall is unbreakable, that the silence comes from above, classified documents, black projects, men in suits who never blink. But that's only half the story. The gatekeepers aren't just in the shadows of Washington or Langley. Some of them walk among us, they smile at conferences, they post on social media. They call themselves truth seekers, patriots, disclosure warriors. And yet, the biggest threat to disclosure is the lack of morality and integrity within the competition. Jealousy, backstabbing, meritless character, assassinations, and controlled narrative conferences. That's right, not the government this time, not the deep state, not even the ridicule from the mainstream. The knife in the back comes from the person standing next to you in the same movement, the one who sees your success as their failure, the one who would rather burn the whole field down than let someone else hold the torch. They don't need classified clearance to sabotage. All they need is ego, envy, and a microphone. Meritless attacks on character, whisper campaigns, gatekeeping who gets to speak, who gets invited, who gets platformed, controlled narratives dressed up as unity, conferences that look like disclosure, but function like turf wars. We are eating ourselves alive. If we ever want real transparency, if we ever want the veil torn wide open, we have to stop fighting over scraps of attention and start demanding integrity stamped from the people who claim to carry the message, because the biggest threat isn't out there. It's right here, in the mirror of our own community. So choose jealousy or justice, backstabbing or brotherhood, controlled narratives or uncontrolled truth. The clock is ticking, and the biggest obstacle to disclosure is us.
A flash.